Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr Speaker, it's good to see this bill back before the House after a good period of time at the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. Those who listen to debates on tax bills will know David Bennett usually gives this speech, the first government speaker after the minister. I thought of trying to do an impression of David Bennett, but I just couldn't manage it. So I'll go for the calmer, nicer version of a speech that Mr Bennett would probably give. Mr Speaker, this bill, as has been outlined, pretty much goes through a range of mechanisms, but primarily the student loan scheme, where we're making amendments to have greater information sharing with Australia. It also has some measures which help to supplement the Brightline test that this House has previously passed. It also has some changes around GST for online services. Those are the three main areas that this bill covers. Mr Speaker, we had quite good debate in the Select Committee, and I think there was quite a lot of cross-party working on these issues. There was general support for many of the measures. Of course, as Mr Nash has outlined, there are some disagreements about how far we should go or whether we should do it in a particular way, but generally the committee worked quite constructively in coming up with some solutions to some areas that were raised in submissions. Can I just say at the outset of my speech, thank you to the officials that were supporting the committee members on this bill. Thank you also to the submitters who fronted up. We also always get some very high quality submissions from tax agents and firms that work in this area on a day-to-day basis. They always provide high quality advice, and it's always appreciated by the committee. Can also say thank you to a very unsung hero of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, Therese Turner, who does a huge amount of work advising the committee as well. Mr Speaker, a big part of the committee's time when we were considering this bill was around the definition of offshore person, because the way in which the bill was drafted initially, effectively one shareholder or 1% of a shareholding in a company could have led to the company triggering the offshore person test, which would have meant, one person would require 99 other people that are shareholders of a company being subjected to residential land withholding tax with regards to their purchase. We felt that was a bit unfair, it was going too far, and we should amend that. The definition also would have hit those with a trust, where, for example, one beneficiary of a family trust, when there could be hundreds of others or dozens of other beneficiaries, one beneficiary living offshore could have triggered it off as well. We felt going for a 25-75 test was more appropriate, so the committee recommended that where 25% of the shareholding of a company is offshore, that is acceptable, but anything over 25, that is the point at which it should be triggered. So the test now is 25-75 between offshore and onshore with regards to this test. Generally though, Mr Speaker, this is about providing greater compliance with the Brightline test that this House has already passed. Rightly or wrongly, whether you want 2 years longer, whether you want a full-blown capital gains tax, the House has passed a 2-year Brightline test that is to ensure that people pay tax appropriately over and above the intentions-based test that we already have. The House has put in place the Brightline test. We now believe that it's appropriate to have this residential land withholding tax as well to ensure those living offshore comply with their tax obligations, and this will make it easier for them to comply and also ensure that we are able to collect the tax appropriately. That's why we're going down this route. And generally, Mr Speaker, I think we've landed in a good space. With regards to the GST for online services, yes, there is that debate about tangible versus intangible. This bill only tackles the intangible, Mr Speaker, intangible goods with regards to offshore companies. Again, I think we've landed in a good space, Mr Speaker. I think there is a general view from New Zealanders that GST for online goods and services is reasonable and is accepted. If you're providing an online service and you're based in New Zealand, you currently have to go through the GST regime. If you're an offshore company right now, you don't. That's inequitable, and that's something we should sort out. It's a lot harder though when you come to tangible goods, because there's a whole lot more complications at play, Mr Speaker, and there's also the difficulty of collecting it, which it's actually easier when it comes to online services, because it's a lot clearer as to those online services Mr. Speaker. So that's why this bill only tackles that aspect. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the student loan scheme, yes, we do have some compliance issues with regards to student loans. Again, we're making further changes to make it easier for the government and for IRD to follow up those people that are not complying with their student loan scheme obligations. We've already seen some examples recently of some other measures, for example, being arrested at the border, Mr. Speaker, having a bit of an impact on people who have not paid their student loans. This element, this change, will give us greater information for us to be able to track those people living offshore in Australia with regards to their student loan scheme. I have to say, though, the solution to student debt is not to give up on student loans and give people a free tertiary education, which is what the Labour Party has proposed. That would have perverse outcomes and would not work, Mr. Speaker, and would blow out the budget over and above the 20-odd billion they want to spend on the universal basic income. Again, a bit of a joke. But, Mr. Speaker, the committee did a good job looking at this bill. I think we've come up with some sensible suggestions and changes, and I commend it to the House. Very good.